Confront them with annihilation and they will survive. Plunge them into deadly situations and they will then live. When people fall into danger, they are then able to strive for victory. That is a famous quote from Sun Tzu, which is a powerful observational truth about the nature of humans in our world. But something I've always loved about fantasy and sci-fi is how it allows us to take things that we consider good in our world, like rising to the occasion, heroic drama, dogged determination, and kind of flip them. These worlds allow us to turn those good things to 11 to a point where they can kind of come back around to being dangerous. And because it's magic and science, they can be full of all kinds of lessons for us to take away from. And to be fair, there are plenty of stories within the context of the mortal realms of societies or individuals rising to the occasion. Epic last stands or rearguard actions against, innumerable foes or esoteric threats and things like that. But really there's one faction, or I should say one species, that I think exemplifies this above all. This being that Sun Tzu quote. To me, the Dwarven, or the dwarves, are a people who survive. They rise to the occasion. They strive for victory. And this has been demonstrated several times over during the Age of Chaos. The armies of the Chaos Gods and Archaon himself are all pouring into the realms, corrupting the lands, crushing armies, and the Khazalid, meaning the old dwarves or Dwarven, who most really resemble the old world types of dwarves, those guys had to make a choice. You can run, try to get to a realm gate, to a Zir or something like that, or you can attempt to survive by buckling down within your hold. And to be fair, many Dwarven did not rise to the occasion. Their holds fell by the thousands, their wealth was plundered, their legacies erased. But this decision point, this figure it out or die moment, is where the Games Workshop intellectual property of dwarves splinters into some of the most cool and recognizable fantastical directions. One root species, one chord of the tree, one story, but of course, many hard choices and reactions to that story with dire consequences. Many of these dwarves, Dwarven, when I use that interchangeably, fled to the gates of Azir, eschewing the oaths that they made to their holds and the physical locations, and basically trying to take as many of their people as they can to survive, seeing that that's the real important thing, and went through the gates. And they adapted by incorporating these other people, humans, elves, etc., into their worldview, when we see that kind of outlined within these cities of Sigmar. These are dwarves who evolved basically to work with others really well out of necessity. Then there were the Fire Slayers, those who chose to ride out the storm of the Age of Chaos in their magma holds. They became masters of using their unique geographical resources like volcanoes, lava flows, etc., to create natural defenses, and then they covered all those defenses with powerful runes to keep the demons out. Many would survive because they would be picky about the contracts, but essentially sell themselves out as mercenary companies. And this would kind of range from, one bad guy kind of being the enemy of my enemy as my friend, and I'll go take out that other chaos camp, or they could refuse jobs if it sounded too quote unquote evil. And the reason this is important is because selling your services out to the chaos people in charge during the Age of Chaos helps you move out of the prey category and into the rival hunter category, so to speak. You're not an imminent threat. We don't have to consume you. You have enough of teeth on you to be a part of the pack. And that's kind of how Fire Slayers, just by being virtue of how fighty they are and how willing to fight they are, survived. Those Dwarven in Chaman, the realm of metal, were able to flee to the skies with their innovation in the newly discovered ether tech. They used this technology to solve a problem. They isolated themselves from the rest of their kin and the rest of the realms, and remained in the clouds until the opportunity was right. In their case, the opportunity was profit from trading amongst the other forces of order. And I go through those different offshoots of the history of the Dwarven people to set up today's topic, which is the newest of their kind, the Helsmiths of Hashut. This is the newest faction to get a battle tome and enter the fray for the mortal realms. When presented with the choice of staying in their holds or, coming up with a different way to survive, something that kind of breaks with Dwarven tradition, these dwarves said yes instead of choosing. The Age of Chaos rolled over these holds, specifically ones in Gur that were very important. And the Dwarven chose to stay. They sealed up their holds, they made a defense that lasted decades upon decades, and eventually in that time, as you start to see people starve and your reserves fade away, you start losing corridors of your hold over time, there's no real hope, things start to change, right? This is the long death that thousands of Dwarven holds across the realms in the Age of Chaos faced. And the same things happened, which is, the stoicism of the dwarves turned to rotten bitterness, and that fostered hate. They are gods. Grimnir and Grugni have abandoned them. There is no help coming. The gates of Azir are shut. And now these holds are slowly becoming a haven for a very desperate kind of hatred. And in that pit of hatred, a voice spoke to them. One who claimed to be an ancient friend. One who stole the fire from the Chaos Gods, to use a Prometheus reference, and wanted to share. These were science and technologies yet untapped by the Dwarven, and it would prove to be the salvation of the Khazalid, while also being their doom. It is from these ceaseless forges of horror that were trapped inside mountains that the Helsmiths of Hashut were born. Chaos-aligned dwarves who wield demonic weaponry. They forge the greatest armors for Archaon's Varangard. They equip the endless hordes of the Ever-Chosen's masses. And just like their despised cousins in the skies above, they revealed themselves only when the moment was right, when opportunity presented itself. And now we have the Hour of Ruin, which is our current narrative cycle that we're going through for Age of Sigmar. Now that is a sales pitch, if you will, for the army, a synopsis of how we got here from the Age of Chaos. And of course, I'll go way more into depth about those ideas in future videos, but I want to spend the rest of this first one talking about Hashut, the titular god of the faction. Now, if you are like me, I had heard of this character very vaguely. In fact, I'll go throw a shout out, go listen to Warhammer Weekly with Vincent Ventrella. I remember when the Lumineth Realm Lords dropped, Tom Lyons went on a massive rant about how it should have been a Hashut thing because of the bull iconography. It was fun. I don't remember what episode it was, but it was a good time. But that was actually the first time I had heard the name Hashut because I missed the overwhelming majority of fantasy battles. Now, this book contains Hashut's account of the Dwarven people and their history. Now, you can choose to believe it or assume it's an unreliable narrator, which is very fair. But it's a highly compelling one, and we're going to talk about it here at the end. And so I'm going to go more into the faction later on, but the rest of this video is going to be focused on the story of the deity and how it sets up the army. So, believe it or not, the Hashut account goes as such. The stories that you have heard about the Dwarven gods is a lie. There were not two, there were four. There were Grugni and Grimnir, which we are well acquainted with within the lore. But in the beginning, in the mortal realms when they all first awoke, there was also Valea, and the eldest brother of them all, Hashut. As was befitting his stature as the eldest, Hashut looked upon the realms and chose Akshi and Chaman to be sort of the center of his people's reawakening. It was just full of all the stuff that the dwarves wanted. However, the two other brothers there, Grimnir and Grugni, wanted those realms for themselves. Grimnir wanted Akshi. Chaman wanted metal. Chaman wanted metal. Grugni wanted the realm of metal, Chaman. And honestly, in this little bit, it made me laugh, and this is partially why I got distracted. In my notes here, I just wrote, Valea seems to be chill, because she doesn't necessarily seem to be drawn to any particular realm, but they made it abundantly clear that Grimnir and Grugni were out for their own. So these three siblings plot and scheme and essentially wrangled control of the realms that they wanted from Hashut and sent him to Gur. And basically the logic went like this. Wow, the realm of beasts is way too harsh for us to turn into something manageable. We need our big brother to go show us how to mine this place. or trying to talk up the area. Like, oh man, there's so many things there. Oh, but I wish I was, had the time or the energy, the effort to go mine it myself. Basically trying to be like, you should go here, and then, we'll manage these little crummy realms when you get back, but you go take the real prize in Gur. At some point, Hashut, being a good guy, is like, okay. And so he goes and he sets up there a mega hold, a giant citadel in Gur called Zorn. And in his words, begins to tame the realm of beasts. His first battle was against a bunch of bull god beasts that he respected greatly. And then he mined huge cities out of the mountain ranges and crafted all kinds of wonders. He then invited his siblings, once some time had passed, to come look upon his works, basically showing off his industrious nature, all the things that they said they couldn't do here. But he invites them openly, come, be my guest, let me share this wealth with you. And then they go, and they have a pretty petty and jealous response that kind of ruins the occasion. Essentially, they're looking around at all the things that Hashut has done personally in Gur, all these wonders, this crazy cool citadel he made, whatever the architecture was, all that stuff. And they're looking around, and they're like, there is no way you could have done all this with the dwarves that you have. You must have broken some rule. Now, the rule that they're talking about is essentially, they have this thing, the Dwarven gods, where they're not going to put souls inside of their automatons. Machines stay machines. We're not going to become soul thieves or, that kind of stuff like the elves do when they tinker with souls. So basically they accuse him of building a bunch of automatons and sticking beast souls inside of them to make these great wonders, because there's no way he and his dwarves could have done it from their perspective or accusation. And Hashut goes to Valea privately and says, I'm promising you, I never would have done that. That's like necromancy. We build automata. We don't build monsters. These are tools. And the situation kind of diffused a bit from the accusations. Everyone kind of chilled, and things could have ended there. But on his way out, Grugni makes a snide remark about how the mechanical wonders that Hashut has made are nothing compared to what he's cooking in Jamon. And this little snide comment that was totally unnecessary seems to have been the thing that sets off Hashut. That was it. He was clearly scorned by his siblings, and he was mad about it. If they wouldn't respect him, then he owes them nothing, right? The oaths of familial bonds and how we delegate stuff and the respect that that's all invalid if you're going to be a turd. That's my paraphrasing, but that's essentially what I'm putting out there. And so from this moment, Hashut's whole mind becomes focused on vengeance. You think you're better than me? You think I couldn't have done this without cheating? Let me show you what I'm capable of, just to put you in your place. And this unlocked for him, I guess, kind of the mental permission, if you will, to start researching into things that they just literally had not considered before. He started teaching his people how to craft new siege weapons that could level entire cities. They mined so deeply that the book just says he cracked into the realm of chaos, which it sounds almost like, I can imagine, like almost a Dwarven version of the Skaven tunneling things where you can kind of go through reality. I imagine Hashut doing something like that, and when he pierced through, he began using what he found as a material, meaning he cracked through to hell, found a bunch of demons, and then used that as a resource, a material that he could craft with. Using these secrets and more, he comes up with a couple gifts for his brothers. For Grimnir, he gives him an artifact that would amplify his already prodigious rage. The idea, the hint here being, is that this feigned gift was essentially what made him lose control and start picking a fight with Volcatrix, and that was his undoing. So this incident has a direct 1-2 connection with him getting himself murdered by a giant drake, which, as we know as a consequence, spawned the Fire Slayers as a faction as we know them. And for Grugni, the artifact he made was, I think, a pendant of some kind, but it caused a form of madness. He would have wild mood swings and be unable to focus on a project for very long. It said his tears became a problem. He would just start breaking down during things. And this is where we potentially learn the answer to a setting-long mystery. Grugni knows that something's not right with him, and he sees that something's not right with Grimnir either. This is pre-shattering with Volcatrix. This is just when they're chilling in the Age of Myth. They see that something's not right. And so Grugni fashions a set of chains that he and Grimnir cannot break, and he ties the two of them together on the top of a mountain. This, famously, is the position that Sigmar finds Grimnir and Grugni in the first stories of Age of Sigmar when the setting launched. We had no idea how they ended up there, and the story from this book is that Grugni prisoned himself there because they could tell that they were going insane as a direct result of the machinations of Hashut. Seeing that her brothers are kind of all starting to get real iffy about their mental states, Valea essentially declares Hashut a betrayer and marches on Zorn. There's this huge epic battle. It is Dwarven on Dwarven warfare, which means a lot of artillery, a lot of gunfire. Bring your shin guards. They got swords too, right? Kind of a thing. And now this next part is sort of intentionally vague. I think they wanted to keep some part of the myth. But at some point in the battle between Hashut and Valea, the only two free Dwarven gods at this time, Valea charges head on, and exactly what happens is unclear. There was an explosion of light, and both Valea and Hashut were gone after that. Now it's recorded as in an event that we will dare not even, recount to you today kind of a story. So they know what happened, but they don't want to say it. But with that, Hashut and Valea are both disappeared from the setting. Zorn at this point is now annihilated and plundered. And there is so much hate and shame felt about these Dark Dwarven that the city was leveled as much as they could find, and any history acknowledging the Hold, Hashut, or any drama with the gods is excised from their written record. It was meant to be forgotten. A shame that nobody would ever learn about. Now it's important to note that in their haste to wipe this history away, they did not get all the temples. Zorn, when you think about it, is not a centralized location. It is a connection of several different forages and minor holds and stuff like this. They just missed a little couple pieces. Deep in those mountains of Gur, temples still stood. The children of Zorn were able to escape and hid themselves among the flourishing empires of other Dwardens of the realms, all the while keeping this hidden hate a secret. Now, to put this in perspective, this whole drama I just rolled out for you happens before Sigmar even enters the setting. Okay, like for our purposes regarding the dwarves. Valea does this fight while the two brothers are still tied up on the mountain. Once they're released, then we have the actual whole age of myth as we have known it thus far, and then it begins to descend into the age of chaos. So think about how long this story truly is. And so we're going to fast forward a little bit, right? Zorn is torn down. Other holds are built in the area because there's stuff inside the Gur Mountains. But on the whole, things start to get really rough as we all start to descend into the Age of Chaos. The holds of the Khazalid empires are under siege. Many of those Dwarven who chose to stand and die did a whole lot more of the dying than the standing part. And their doors were sealed and a long siege began. As desperation, hunger, rage, and suffering grew, the hidden Hashutites, I guess we could call them, revealed themselves and offered another way. The other Dwarven gods have abandoned you. Right at this point in our story, Grimnir shattered, Grugni wants nothing to do with any of them. But Hashut has much to teach, and he can equip you to survive in this new world. And that story started to sound really appealing. And it was kind of I guess, softened by the idea of pitching Hashut not as this dark chapter of our history that needs forgotten, but as a dwarf that was so great and mighty, he makes his enemies the plaything in his forge. Right, that's the kind of bravado a bunch of dying dwarves might be super into. Now we're going to go into another video, the details of how they started the evolution of learning more about the processes of turning demons into ammunition, essentially, or an energy source. But because of this revelation, these little bits of hope, or dark hope, I should say, given out during the worst of times was enough. The forges were stoked. First commands came through the Hashut cultists, and as the temples and stuff began to rebuild and grow, a voice could be heard, deep and rumbling like the sound of a lava flow. And this is going through all the minds of these dwarves. Hashut's presence is reassured to them by a rhythmic hammering within their mind, as if someone is like working on the workshop table right next to you. So it's almost like a very personal connection to their deity, which makes them unique amongst all the other dwarves, because as much as the Fyreslayers love Grimnir's, like sincerely, he's not there in the active sense. And for his greatest devotees, or the most in touch with him, Hashut can speak to them directly as a prophet. And all the while, throughout the Age of Chaos and Sigmar through now, this footprint of Hashut in reality has begun to grow, and the Hellsmiths have really begun to take off. And that's where I want to pause like the linear story of how things go on. I really want to keep it focused on Hashut, the deity, but we were going to talk about the society, the demons, the tech, and all that kind of stuff, because it's an immense amount to absorb. But I wanted to end this video, like I end all of them, by asking, why is this cool? What's cool about this? Well, like I said, this is a deeply unreliable narrator, like capital U, capital N for unreliable narrator kind of a thing. However, this story it explains two things that had no other explanation before, which is how Grimnir and Grugni were found tied up at the top of a mountain, and the fate of Valea, which we don't know the details on exactly what happened to her, but we can surmise it's at least possible that somewhere she's being reconstituted by another path of dwarves that were split off. But we get details that just literally didn't exist before. And I want to note here a reoccurring theme within this book that's going to be in the background of all these other videos, is that the other Dwarven factions are deeply ashamed about the Helsmiths of Hashut. They see it as a perversion of their people, and this is in line with the fact that we hadn't heard a ton about them for so long. There were plenty of hints, of course, but the idea of a faction who so highly prizes their history and their epic deeds, their oaths, their grudges, for them to systematically wipe out an entire part of their people and history from the records, it explains why we don't know much about them, and also why they don't want to talk about it. I mean, not to mention it shows off just how dark their portrayal was perceived. Now, gods are notoriously hard to kill in Age of Sigmar for both plot and, Black Library book reasons. Grimnir was shattered into oblivion, but his power remains. Nagash has been struck down a couple times now. It happens. So it's certainly not impossible to think that Hashut was broken by whatever Valea did and needed to be kind of put back together. His method for doing so is worship and pain. Suffering that happens at his behest in his forges is essentially like feeds him in a weird way, like a chaos god. In fact, one compelling theory you could walk away from this book with is that there is a greater demon named Hashut who's just kind of using these guys like puppets. I don't believe that, but all we have is their account of things, and all the other dwarves literally don't want to speak about it. And I think that makes them a very compelling enemy, is that it's cloaked in something familiar. All the traditions and the iconography and the lifestyle that we can recognize as clearly being Dwarven. But within that is this next thing of like, it just seems so wrong though. Nothing about the stuff in this book couldn't just be a greater demon who really doesn't mind screwing other over demons. You know what I mean? Like just sending lesser demons below him to act as cannon fodder. Or, conversely, it could be 100% correct, again, because they bring evidence that nobody else has and nobody else wants to address their story. Because of that, I think they're a very compelling enemy when it comes to stuff. I honestly cannot wait for Black Library to catch up and start doing books for these guys. Whether it's a Grimnir, or a Gotrek rather, book, him versus them, that would be very interesting. But honestly, even just a Cities of Sigmar generic book about going to war against these guys would give us such a picture. Regardless, the story doesn't even have to be true, right? Like I said, one end of the extreme spectrum is it's all a lie and they're just being played. The other end of the spectrum is it's all true. It actually does not matter, because either of those versions still make whatever this product that they have become as a perfect mirror for all of the worst parts of the dwarves, all of their greed taken to excess, all of their fixations, their willingness to, assume that they have the best intentions or that they're smart enough amongst everybody else. that they can do what other people can't. They don't need to be right to reveal a side of the Dwarven culture that they're ashamed of. And all of the other Dwarven factions are feeling that right now, which makes it, in my mind, highly compelling. I would love to know your thoughts. This actually has been an army that I've wanted to know about for quite a while. Thank you, Games Workshop, for sending me an advanced copy of it. And it really has been an absolute joy to learn about their vision for bringing this concept, because, there was just a lot of stuff that didn't translate one-to-one from the old world with their old lore. But I do feel like they brought a wealth of it over in terms of its theme and flavor. This book, it feels complete in the sense of I understand how they got where they are, who they worship, and how they do what they do with their weapons and stuff. But they did leave a ton of room open for this model range to expand without any logical leaps, which is wonderful. And we have bull centaurs, but they offhandedly mention other kinds of aberrants as well, that kind of stuff. And it all comes together. It's all just a fantastic, I guess, just collection of ideas that are just reflections upon what would that same root species of Dwarven turn into if one of them did the worst things that they had to do to survive. And just given the sheer number of holds in existence, some of them were bound to do that. Now, from that initial ember of these terrible bad decisions, it will turn into a wildfire as they start, instead of just surviving, begin thriving amongst their chaos, enemies all around them. But at its core, it's just another survival story, and it is written that way, and I love it. They have unique positives and negatives that the other one of their cousins didn't have. None of the other dwarves have a personal deity in the way that Hashut is personal to them. None of the other gods tried to help in the way that Hashut tried to help. You're ashamed of him? Well, at least he showed up, is basically the premise, and I gotta say, I have absolutely no arguments with that. But I would like to hear your thoughts. Now, I do want to add here at the very end, I'm going to talk about it a few times throughout the week, but the reason he has a bull aspect is because when he was broken, this is kind of my own somewhat conjecture based on what I've read, he was broken, and then as he's coming back in Gur, which is his home, was in Gur where all this happened, he's kind of taking the form of some of the local wildlife that he really respected, specifically the god beast bull monsters that he drove off when he first planted there. So he's kind of coming back in a different mode. He's a new Hashut 2.0. Hashut clear. And that's why everything's bull themed. It kind of took me a second to actually realize why, but that's what it is. Anyway, friends, let me know what you think about him. He's technically not a chaos god in the typical sense. He's just a man with a plan, and I gotta respect that. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends.